On the lower reaches of the rivers, where mills are built, they sing on though through the din of the machinery and all the noisy confusion of dogs, cattle, and workmen. On one occasion, while a wood chopper was at work on the river bank, I observed one cheerily singing and within the reach of the flying chips, nor does any kind of unwanted disturbance put him in bad humor or frighten him. Out of a calm self-possession, and passing through a narrow forge, I once drove one ahead of me through rapid to rapid, disturbing him 4 times in quick succession where he could not very well fly past me on account of the narrowness of the channel. Most birds under similar circumstances fancy themselves pursued and become suspiciously uneasy, but instead of growing nervous about it, he made his usual dippings and sang one of the most tranquil strains. When observed within a few yards, their eyes are seen to express remarkable gentleness and intelligence, but they seldom allow so near a view unless one wears clothing of about the same color as the rocks and the trees, and knows how to sit still. On one occasion, while rambling along the shore of a mountain lake where the birds, at least those born that season, have never seen a man, I sat down to rest on a large stone close to the water's edge, upon which it seemed to the owls and sandpipers were in the habit of alighting when they came to feed on that part of the shore, and some of the other birds also. When they came down to wash or drink, in a few minutes along came a whirring owl and alighted on the stone beside me, within reach of my hand. Then suddenly observing me, he stood nervously as if about to fly on the instant. But as I remained as motionless as stone, he gained confidence and looked on my hand. Then suddenly observing me, he stopped nervously as if about to fly on the instant, but as I remained motionless as a stone, he gained confidence and looked at me steadily in the face for about a minute, then flew quietly to the outlet and began to sing. Next came a sandpiper and gazed at me with such the same guileless expression of eye as the ozel, and lastly down with a swoop came a Steller's jay out of a fir tree, probably with the intention of moistening his noisy throat. But instead of sitting confidently as my other visitors had done, he rushed off at once, nearly tumbling heels over head into the lake in suspicious confusion, and with loud screams roused the neighborhood. Love for songbirds with their sweet human voices appears to be more common and failing than love for flowers. Everyone loves flowers to some extent, at least in life's fresh morning, attracted by them as instinctively as hummingbirds and bees. Even the young digger Indians have sufficient love for the brightest of those found growing on the mountains to gather them and braid them as decorations for their hair. And I was glad to discover, though, the few Indians that could be induced to talk on the subject that they have named for the wild rose and the lily and other conspicuous flowers. Whether available as food or otherwise, most men, however, whether savage or civilized, become apathetic towards all the plants that have no other apparent use than the use of beauty. But fortunately, one's first instinctive love of songbirds is never wholly obliterated. No matter what the influence upon our lives they may be, I have often been delighted to see a pure spiritual glow come into the countenance of hard businessmen and old miners when a songbird chanced to alight near them. Nevertheless, the little mouthful of meat that swells out the breath of some young birds is too often the cause of their death. Larks and robins in particular are brought to market in hundreds, but fortunately the ozel has no enemy so eager to eat its little body as to follow him into the deep mountain solitudes. I never knew him to be chased even by hawks. An acquaintance of mine, a sort of hill mountaineer, had a pet cat, a great and drowsy, overgrown creature, about as broad-shouldered as a lynx. During the winter, while the snow lay deep, the mountaineer sat in his lonely cabin among the pines, smoking his pipe and wearing the dull time away. Tom was his sole companion, sharing his bed and sitting up beside him on a stool, with as much the same drowsy appearance, expression of his eye, as his master. The good-natured bachelor was content with his hard fare of soda bread and bacon. But Tom, the only creature in the woods acknowledging dependence on him, must needs to be provided with fresh meat. Accordingly, he bestirred himself to drive squirrel traps and waded the snowy wood with his gun, making sad havoc among the few winter birds, sparing neither robin, sparrow, nor tiny nuthatch. And the pleasure of seeing a tomcat and grow fat was his great reward. One cold afternoon, while hunting along the riverbank, he noticed a plain-feathered little bird skipping about in the shallows and immediately raised his gun. But then the confiding songster began to sing, and now listening to his summer melody, the charmed hunter turned away, saying, "Bless your little heart, I can't shoot you, not even for Tom." Even so far as icy Alaska, I have found my glad singer. When I was exploring the glaciers between Mount Fairweather and the Siskiyou River one cold day in November, after trying in vain to force a way through the innumerable icebergs of Dum Dum Bay to the great glaciers at the head of it, I was weary and baffled and sat resting in my canoe, convinced at last that I would have to leave this part of my work for another year. Then I began to plan my escape to open water before the young ice which was beginning to form would shut me in. While I thus lingered, drifting with the bergs in the midst of these gloomy forebodings and all the terrible glacier desolation and grandeur, I suddenly heard the well-known whir of an ozel's wings, and looking up saw my little comforter coming straight across the ice from the shore. In a second or two, he saw with me, flying 3 times around my head with a happy salute, as if saying, "Cheer up, old friend, you see I'm here and all is well." Then he flew back to shore, alighted on the topmost jag of a stranded iceberg, and began to nod and bow as though he were on one of his favorite boulders in the midst of a sunny Sierra cascade. The species is distributed along all the mountain ranges of the Pacific coast, from Alaska to Mexico, and east to the Rocky Mountains. Nevertheless, it is yet comparatively little known. Audubon and Wilson did not meet it. Swainson was, I believe, the first naturalist to describe a specimen from Mexico. Specimens were shortly afterward procured by Drummond near the sources of the Athabasca River between the 54th and 56th parallel, and it has been collected by nearly all of the numerous exploring expeditions undertaken of the late, though our western states and territories, for it never fails to engage the attention of naturalists in a peculiar manner. Such then is our little Finculus, beloved of every one who is so fortunate as to know him, tracing on strong wind every curve of the most precipitous torrents from one extremity of the Sierra to the other, not fearing to follow them through their darkest gorges and coldest snow, tunnels, acquainted with every waterfall, echoing their divine music, and throughout the whole of their beautiful lives interpreting all that we in our unbelief call terrible in the utterance of torrents and storms as only varied expressions of God's eternal love.